Hi, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Speakers, and today I'm here with our leadership, domestic abuse and management speaker, Andrew Payne. Now, domestic abuse is something we've all heard about, maybe some of us have even experienced, and it's sadly something that's been increasing during lockdown, and it's easy to see why. So when Andrew first got in touch, we were blown away by not only his extraordinary story, but also his storytelling skills. As part of Andrew's TEDx talk, we realised 1 in 4 cases are surprisingly violence against men. So, Andrew, a guy speaking about domestic abuse, that's quite unusual, isn't it?
It is, but it's increasing. Well, it's common. And since the TEDx talk came out, the amount of women that have contacted me saying, it happened to my brother, it happened to my uncle, it happened to my partner. He didn't report it, but he was left in a really bad way at the time. And so it's so important when we consider domestic abuse as an issue that, yes, we remember that women are the greater proportion of victims, but the men are victims too. Also, you have parents abused by children. Domestic abuse is rife in the LGBT community. And so as employers particularly, we need to be aware of that. We need to think about that in our workplace, in our policies, in our procedures. And so that's why I talk about it. For me, it happened quite a long time ago. It was in a former marriage for 10 years that I went through it. And I've had some years out of that. So I'm now in a good place to talk about it.
So how does a man or a person even fall into an abusive relationship like that?
Well, you would have thought that a sensible person would be somehow tricked in some way. The other person was amazing, they fell in love, and then it all kind of unraveled from there. But there is another way into abusive relationships, and this was the case for me, where I was young, I was naive, I didn't have any clear sense of boundaries or even what that looked like, and I loved helping other people. And so in that situation, I was very vulnerable really to falling into an abusive relationship. And before I knew it, I was in so deep, but I wanted to help my now ex-wife. I wanted to heal my now ex-wife, and I felt that I could if I just loved her long enough and all this kind of stuff. So I fell into it, but looking back, it was probably partly my age, but this sense of not having clear boundaries and being used to responding to red flags and taking action, even if it doesn't feel like easy action to take.
So how long, help me understand this, how long did you stay in the abusive relationship, and when did you decide to leave?
Well, I was married to my ex-wife for 8 or 9 years. We were together for 10 years. And it was really right towards the end where my wife had actually stabbed me, and my neighbor challenged me and said, Andrew, you do realize this is domestic abuse? She'd witnessed the incident. And I'd never really thought about it being domestic abuse before. I just knew we had a difficult relationship, a violent relationship. And that really started a period of awakening, I suppose. And then it really broke down a year or 2 later as I started to ask more questions and be more aware of what was going on.
So it was only after you realised that it was actually an abusive relationship that you felt that you could leave?
Yeah, because I'd always thought, and this is quite common for women and men caught in abusive relationships, I'd always thought it was my fault, that it was my idiotic behaviour that was provoking these outbursts. And it was really when my neighbour challenged me that I thought, maybe this isn't all my fault. Maybe this isn't okay. And it started a period of asking questions, but was still in another year or 2 till actually the relationship broke down fully.
So tell me about your speaking experience. What sort of events do you share your story at?
In terms of the domestic abuse speaking, it varied from a men's conference to I'm doing some work, actually. I'm really excited to be doing some work later this year with CAFCAS. They are the independent organisation that advise judges in the family courts. And I have my own experience of being in the family courts and talking to them, really raising awareness around domestic abuse and how that impacts family court situations. I've also done some talking at safeguarding events as well for heads of schools and safeguarding, talking about human biases and prejudices, and really just opening up the story of men and women being victims of domestic abuse. And I think particularly for men, we think, well, surely a man would be a weak man if he was the victim of domestic abuse. But I've had plenty of guys that I've worked with since the TEDx talk and in some of the charity work that I do. These guys, they're enormous. They're like 6'5". Well, one of them specifically, 6'5". He owns his own legal practice, and yet he was the long-term victim of domestic abuse. And his partner was partially sighted and in ill health. You just wouldn't think that could have happened in that situation, but it does.
So What inspires you and what do you enjoy most about your speaking engagements?
I love the variety because, as you said at the beginning, I also talk about leadership stuff. So if I think about this last week, I did an event yesterday on burnout, on recognizing the symptoms of burnout, but also if you think that you're in a situation where you could be burning out, but there's no easy option for you, there's no obvious escape from that right now. How do you cope with conditions of burnout without burning out? What are the techniques you can use? So that was something I did this week. The week before, I was doing a national event on procrastination and some of the productivity challenges created by this very COVID crisis that we're all still juggling. So I love the variety. I love that on the one hand, I'm doing stuff in the field of domestic abuse, parental alienation, which I'm passionate about. But on the other hand, I love some of the leadership stuff. And some of the decision-making stuff that I talk about, really picking apart some of the dilemmas that business leaders face, and how do we get beyond those dilemmas? How do we outsmart the dilemmas and improve our decision-making ability? So it's got to be the variety. That's what I most love about speaking.
And it's also about increasing awareness as well, isn't it? I mean, what would you say to an employer whose employee was experiencing this domestic abuse?
I became a rubbish employee as a result of what was going on at home. And I wouldn't have talked about it back then. There was talking back sort of the beginning of 2000, and there wasn't the same awareness perhaps as there is today around mental health. But I carried the burden of that. I was taking so much sick time where really I was just trying to cope with the chaos. I was often coming into work with bruises and cuts on my faces. It was always a shaving incident. And I often wondered whether someone would say, Andrew, do you need some help with your shaving here, fella? Because you seem to be having a few problems with it. But I think just to be aware of domestic abuse, there's so much talk about burnout, and rightly so, the focus is on work. But usually there's a combination of factors that can create burnout, and being mindful that this stuff, you might have a rubbish employee, but you don't know what's going on at home for them, and they may not feel easy about talking to you. So things like getting your policies and procedures in place, but involving your team in creating those so that there's an awareness that domestic abuse happens, and what could be some of the signs to look out for. And what are we going to do if we have two people in our organization in a relationship and there are allegations of domestic abuse? How do we handle that? So some of it is the policies, procedures, the conversation, and being prepared that it could happen, and it will happen. But statistically, if you employ 50 people, some of them will be in an abusive relationship at some point, and it may be when they're working for you.
And it's just really, great to see at the moment that we are so much more aware within the business framework of mental health in general. So it can only be a good thing. The other question I have for you finally is, what would you say to someone who is stuck in an abusive relationship at home, who are trying to unravel and leave and move forward? What advice would you give?
It's so difficult, and there are people that I talk to where they agonize over family members. Do I approach them? Do I challenge them? Do I just let them know I'm here? What do I do? I would encourage anybody caught in abuse to talk to someone that you trust. For me, I felt so ashamed as a guy. What kind of a man allows himself to get knocked about by his wife? That's not a true man, surely. And there's obviously so much talk around manning up and who wears the trousers and do you need a kitchen pass to go out. But for women or men caught in abuse, talk to someone you trust. Just open up that conversation, because when you're caught in abuse, it's very difficult to see beyond that. And abusive people are very good at the gaslighting, at getting you to doubt your own sanity and think it's all your fault. But if you have a connection with someone outside that relationship that you trust, it will help you to see what's truly going on. And then understand, the second thing I would say is, as you start to awaken, the turmoil will really step up again. Do you leave? Do you stay? How do you leave? This kind of stuff is really tough, because you'll be used to just battening down the hatches, playing it safe and trying to cope. So taking bold decisions will be quite difficult for you, because if ever you were able to take bold decisions, that will have been squeezed out of you over time. So understand that it's not an easy journey, but that the grass really is greener on the other side of the hill. It's just you have to crawl through the slime and the mud to get there, and it will be difficult but worth it when you've made that step. It's the best advice I could give to someone that's caught in abuse.
Lots of positive baby steps. Gaslighting is something I hear so much about these days. Andrew, thank you so much for that. It was so enlightening to listen to you this morning. And I hope that people who are listening who haven't been exposed to domestic violence can recognise and see the issue and benefit from your learnings when faced with these extremely challenging situations. So thank you so much for your time today. And if you would like to book Andrew, do contact Jane, myself, or Steve at greatbritishuk.com, or call us on 01753 439 289. Thank you so much for watching. And Andrew, thanks once again.
Thanks, Jane.